Imagine it's the 25th of November, 1953. You're standing on the edge of the pitch at Wembley Stadium in London, England. The famous Twin Towers rise above you into a grey winter sky. Around you, 100,000 people are packed shoulder to shoulder. They are breathing out clouds of steam in the cold afternoon air. The grass is heavy and green. The white goalposts gleam under the fading light. And there is a sound, low and confident, rumbling through the stands like distant thunder. This is the home of football. The English invented this game. They wrote its first rules. They built the first clubs, the first leagues, the first stadiums. And here, on their sacred ground, England have never, not once, lost a football match. They have never lost to a team from outside the British Isles. Not in 90 years. The men in white shirts walking onto the pitch carry that history on their backs like a crown. To the people in these stands, it is not a hope. It is a fact. England do not lose at home. The world comes to Wembley to be taught a lesson. On the other side stand 11 men in deep red shirts. They are from Hungary, a small country behind what people are starting to call the Iron Curtain. Most of the English crowd cannot pronounce their names. The newspapers have politely called them talented. Privately, many expect a comfortable English victory. One English defender will later admit he looked across at the Hungarians warming up. He noticed something strange about their boots, their movements, and their captain. Their captain, who looked, in his words, a little overweight. He almost smiled. He thought this would be easy. It would not be easy. In the next 90 minutes, everything the English believed about football was about to be torn apart. Everything about how the game should be played, about formations, and where players should stand. The team that called itself the Masters was about to meet the team that would be remembered as the future. If you love untold football stories and hidden moments from the beautiful game, subscribe now, because the story you're about to hear changed football history forever. Let me take you back to the very first minute. The referee blows his whistle, the ball moves to the Hungarian forwards, and within 60 seconds, something happens that the 100,000 people in Wembley will never forget. A Hungarian player named Nándor Hidegkuti receives the ball near the edge of the England penalty area. He is wearing the number 9 shirt. In 1953, the number 9 meant something very specific. The number 9 was the center forward, the main striker, the man who stood high up the pitch. His job was to stay close to the opponent's goal and score. Every English defender on that field had been trained their whole lives to mark the number 9 tightly. They were taught to never let him breathe. But Hidegkuti is not standing where he is supposed to. He has dropped deep, far away from goal, into the empty space between the English defense and midfield. The English center half faces a terrible choice. Does he follow Hidegkuti deep, leaving a huge hole in the heart of the defense? Or does he stay back? Does he let this dangerous man have the ball with time and space? He hesitates. And in football, hesitation is death. Hidegkuti takes a touch, drags the ball back to deceive a sliding defender, and strikes it. The ball flies into the English net. 1 minute gone. Hungary led 1-0. The great roar of Wembley dies in 100,000 throats. There is a stunned, almost frightened silence. To understand why this single goal mattered so much, we have to go back and understand their world. Because this was not just a match. It was a collision between two completely different ideas. In the 1950s, almost every team in England and most of the world played the same shape. They called it the WM. Picture the letter W and the letter M placed on top of each other. 3 defenders at the back, 2 halfbacks just in front of them, 2 inside forwards a little higher, and 3 attackers across the front, including that all-important number 9 in the center. It was a rigid system. Every player had a fixed position and a fixed job. The defenders defended, the forwards attacked. You stayed in your zone, you marked your man, you did your duty. It was orderly, disciplined, and very, very English. It had worked for 30 years, and the English saw no reason to change it. Why would you? They believed they had already perfected the game. But far away, in the cafes and training grounds of Budapest, men were asking a dangerous question. What if the old way was wrong? What if players didn't have to stay in fixed positions? What if a forward could drop deep, a defender could push up, and a winger could drift inside? What if the whole team could move like water, flowing into spaces, constantly switching roles, leaving the opponents grasping at shadows? This idea would one day grow into total football. But in 1953, it had no famous name. It had only a team. And that team had a nickname that still sends a shiver through football history. They were called the Magical Magyars, the Golden Team. And they were, at that exact moment, the greatest football team on the entire planet. Let me tell you how they rose. The story of this Hungarian team begins with ruins. Hungary had been on the losing side of the Second World War. The country was poor, occupied, and rebuilding from rubble. The new communist government understood something powerful. Football could make a nation proud again. So football was given enormous importance. The best players were gathered together. Many were placed in the army team, Honved, so they could train together as one unit. It was almost like a national team that played every single week. And what players they were. At the center of it all stood a short, stocky man. His name was Ferenc Puskas. He did not look like an athlete. He looked like a man you might meet in a bakery, but that left foot could do impossible things. He could pass the ball 40 yards onto a coin. He could shoot with incredible power. Goalkeepers were afraid to dive. Puskas was the captain, the leader, the heartbeat. He would go on to score more than 80 goals in 85 games for Hungary. Beside him played Sandor Kocsis, nicknamed Goldenhead for his ability with headers. There was Zoltan Cibor flying down the wing. There was the brilliant goalkeeper Gula Grosics, one of the first keepers in history brave enough to rush far out of his goal to clear the ball. He acted like an extra defender. People later called this the sweeper keeper, and Grosics was doing it decades before it became normal. And then there was Hidekuti, the deep-lying forward who broke the rules of the old game. Guiding them all was a heavy-set, thoughtful manager named Gustav Sebes. Sebes was a believer in the new ideas. He wanted his players to swap positions seamlessly. He wanted them to all attack and all defend, to confuse and exhaust their opponents. He drilled them for hours. He even prepared for the Wembley match with specific training. He used heavier English-style footballs and a pitch measured to the exact size of Wembley. Nothing was left to chance. By the time they arrived in London, they had not lost in 3 years. They were Olympic champions, having won gold the year before. But the world, especially the English world, had not truly noticed. Behind the Iron Curtain, their greatness was a secret. Wembley was about to reveal that secret to everyone. So now you understand the two teams, the Masters and the Revolutionaries. Now let me take you back into the storm, because that first goal was only the beginning. After Hidekuti's strike, the English steady themselves. They push forward. In the 15th minute, England equalize. The crowd explodes with relief, 1-1. Perhaps, they think, order is being restored. Perhaps the natural law of football will hold. It was a beautiful illusion. It lasted only moments. Now the Hungarians began to play in a way that Wembley had never seen before. The red shirts moved constantly. A defender would suddenly appear in attack. A forward would drop back. The ball zipped between them in quick, short, clever passes. The English players kept turning around to find that their man had vanished. A different Hungarian was running into the gap he left behind. They were chasing ghosts. Before we continue, I want to hear your opinion. What do you think happened here? Was English football outdated, or did they meet a great team on the wrong day? The Hungarian goals began to come. Each one was more beautiful and more painful than the last. Hidekuti scored again, drifting into space no one was watching, finishing calmly. Then came the goal that people still talk about 70 years later. The goal of Ferenc Puskas. The ball is played to Puskas near the edge of the 6-yard box, close to the goal line. Billy Wright comes flying in to make a hard tackle exactly as he had been taught. It looks certain. Puskas is trapped against the byline with nowhere to go. And then Puskas does something almost cruel. With the sole of his foot, he drags the ball back. He pulls it away from the goal at the exact instant Wright launches into the tackle. The English captain flies past him, tackling nothing but air, sliding away helplessly. Now Puskas has half a yard of space. That is all he needs. He swivels and smashes the ball into the roof of the net. A writer described Billy Wright in that moment as a fireman heading to the wrong fire. By halftime, Hungary led 4-2. The Wembley crowd did something extraordinary. They began to applaud the Hungarians. They were watching their own team being dismantled. They recognized they were witnessing something genuinely magnificent. Greatness has a way of silencing even loyalty. The second half brought no mercy. Hungary kept flowing forward in those red waves. The final whistle blew with the scoreboard reading a number England had never seen. Hungary 6, England 3, 6 goals. Conceded at home, by the team that invented football, by the team that had never lost to a foreign nation in 90 years. The crown had been knocked off in front of their own people, and they had applauded. Now here is where the story deepens into a controversy that would last for years. How had England fallen so far behind without even realizing it? For decades, England had refused to take international football seriously. They believed they were so superior that they did not need to learn from anyone. They had refused to enter the World Cup, treating it as a tournament for lesser nations. When they did enter in 1950, they lost to the United States, who barely played football. Many in England dismissed it as a freak accident. They told themselves it meant nothing. But Wembley in 1953 could not be dismissed as a fluke. 6-3 is a verdict. It raised an uncomfortable question. Had the masters become the students? Had the rest of the world quietly overtaken them while they stood still, admiring their past? Some tried to explain it away. They blamed the conditions. They blamed luck. They said the Hungarians trained together all year, while England's players came from different clubs. There was truth in that. But the deeper explanation was harder to swallow. The Hungarians had simply thought more deeply about football. They had been brave enough to break the old rules, while England guarded them like holy law. If anyone still doubted the verdict, the Hungarians offered England a rematch. It was arranged for 1954 in Budapest. England traveled determined to restore their pride. What happened next was almost beyond belief. If you're still watching, subscribe for more forgotten football history. In Budapest, Hungary did not just beat England again, they destroyed them. The final score was 7-1, 7 goals to 1. It remains the heaviest defeat in the entire history of the England national team. It was a statement carved in stone. The 1953 match had not been a fluke at all. It had been a warning England refused to hear. Now the lesson was repeated more brutally. Let me show you the evidence of how completely Hungary had reinvented the game. Look first at Hidekuti, the false number 9. He created an impossible problem. The English centre-half could not decide whether to follow him or hold his position. This idea of the deep-lying forward would echo through football for 70 years. Decades later, the Spanish national team in Barcelona would use a version of this idea. Messi himself, in his most devastating years, often played as a false 9. He dropped into midfield exactly as Hidekuti had done at Wembley. The seed of modern football's most famous tactics was planted that afternoon. Look next at the goalkeeper Grosix, rushing out to act as an extra defender. This was revolutionary. For decades, keepers were expected to stay on their line. It would take until the modern era for the world to fully embrace what Grosix was doing. And look at the philosophy itself. All 11 players comfortable on the ball, all of them able to attack and defend, constantly moving and switching positions. This idea traveled. The Dutch in the 1970s would build on it and call it total football. The teams of Johan Cruyff were the spiritual children of those magical Magyars. Cruyff would later take those ideas to Barcelona, influencing the modern age. Trace the line backwards to those 11 men in red shirts at Wembley. They taught the inventors how the game of the future would be played. That is the legacy. But there is a darker, more human part of this story. The greatest team was about to suffer a heartbreak so cruel it still feels unfair. Hungary marched into the 1954 World Cup in Switzerland as overwhelming favorites. They had not lost a match in 4 years, more than 30 games unbeaten. They smashed everyone, including an 8-3 win against West Germany. But their talisman, Puskas, was injured by a heavy challenge in that match. That injury would haunt everything that followed. Hungary reached the final. Waiting for them was West Germany again. Everyone expected Hungary to win. The match was played in the pouring rain in the city of Bern. Hungary started like a storm. Within 8 minutes, they led 2-0. It looked like a coronation. But football does not care about destiny. The Germans fought back in the mud and rain. They equalized. In the final minutes, Helmut Rahn struck the ball into the Hungarian net. Germany led 3-2. Puskas thought he had scored an equalizer, but the linesman raised his flag. Offside. The goal was ruled out. The whistle blew. Germany were champions. Hungary had lost the match that mattered. In Hungary, it was a tragedy. The best team never to win the World Cup. If this story surprised you, hit like and subscribe for more. The tragedy did not end on the pitch. 2 years later, the 1956 revolution began. Soviet tanks rolled into Budapest. The country was thrown into chaos. The Honved Club happened to be traveling abroad. Players faced an agonizing choice. Return home to an occupied country or stay away and never go back. Puskas chose not to return. So did Coxis and Chibor. The Golden Team was scattered to the winds by history and politics. Puskas was banned for a time, but Real Madrid took a chance on him. He was reborn, winning European Cups and becoming a legend all over again. The magic had never left him, only his country had been taken away. The team that should have ruled for a decade burned brightly and then vanished, broken apart not by a better team but by the forces of the 20th century. Perhaps that is why we remember them. They were perfect, and they were doomed. Now let me return you to Wembley, the 25th of November, 1953. The grey sky, the Twin Towers, and the 100,000 people falling silent. The England players walked off their own pitch as broken men. Billy Wright later spoke about that day with painful honesty. The establishment was forced to begin asking the questions it had avoided. How do we coach? How do we think about formations? Why did we stop learning? Change came slowly to England, but it came. Within 15 years, they modernized. They won the World Cup in 1966 on that very same Wembley turf. The seeds of triumph were planted in their most humiliating defeat. The lesson the Hungarians taught was a wound, but it was also a gift. Every time you see a striker drop deep to confuse defenders, you see Hidekuti. Every time you see a goalkeeper sweep the ball away, you see Grosix. Every time a team flows forward as one, you hear the echo of those men in red. The beautiful game played today was born in 1953. A small nation arrived as strangers and left as the architects of the future. They lost the World Cup, but they won the most important argument. They proved football is not fixed rules, but an idea to be reimagined. The masters became the students, and the game was never the same again. This documentary is based on historical records, interviews, and reports. Viewers are encouraged to explore the evidence and form their own conclusions. Share this story with someone who loves football history. Subscribe to Football Vault History, and I'll see you in the next documentary.